Hey there, this is Erica from Ever Educating, and this channel is teaching tips, tools, ideas, and resources for new college instructors. Today we're talking about Bloom's Taxonomy, the revised version, and we're going to go over first what it is, how to use it, and then why to use it in your courses. Now, both the original and the revised version of the taxonomy have 6 elements. In the original version, those elements were knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And that went up, so starting with knowledge and ending with evaluation. But since then, there's been a revised version that's more like action verb friendly, and I think it makes it easier to understand what these elements are. So in the new version, or the revised version, it's remember, understand, apply, analyze, evaluate, and curate. So those are similar, but then some of them have changed as well. And again, that goes from remember at the bottom to curate at the top of the taxonomy. I'm going to focus on the revised version, and so the first stage of the taxonomy is to remember. And so in this case, for example, it's can students recall information that you give to them, or maybe recall information that they learned before your course. And in this case, it's very much like, okay, here's a definition, can you remember this definition, right? Here's this concept, can you tell me what the concept is a week later? So that's this element. It's just like, can they actually integrate into the memory the concepts, the ideas that you are teaching them about? The next stage is understand. So in this case, it's not just, okay, tell me the definition of a metaphor, and they repeat exactly what you told them in class. It's, can they understand what a metaphor is? Can they compare a non-metaphor to a metaphor? Can they explain? Can they summarize, hey, here's what a metaphor is, in their own words rather than using the words that you gave them, right? So in this case, it's not just can they recall the information, but can they actually understand what the information means? Like, have they actually internalized it and they can explain it or summarize it for someone else and not just have the exact information you gave them when teaching them and when they were memorizing that information. The next stage is applying the information. So using the metaphor example, okay, first they remember what a metaphor is, then they can actually explain in their own words what a metaphor is and they're correct. The next is, can they see a metaphor in a story or on a TV show or in a movie or whatever the case may be? Can they actually apply their knowledge of what a metaphor is to an actual situation? So that's that next stage of this taxonomy. The next stage is analyze. So using the metaphor, can they analyze why a metaphor is being used in a certain paragraph? Can they analyze the reason that the metaphor is related to, let's say, the sea in a book about marine life? Can they analyze why a writer is using a metaphor in this scene rather than concrete language, for example? So in this case, it's not just, okay, well, I know what it is, I understand what it is, I can apply it and pick a metaphor out of the text. It's, okay, can I analyze why it's being used? Can I analyze the context that it's in and why it matches that context, or why it doesn't? And that leads to the next one, the evaluate one. So in this case, can they evaluate, can a better metaphor be used in their own writing? Looking at the metaphors used in a text from the 18th century versus the 19th versus the 20th versus the 21st, can they evaluate why there's differences or similarities between the metaphors being used in these different contexts? So we're getting much more big picture as we go up the taxonomy. And then the last stage is curate. So in the case of a metaphor, it might be, not that complex to curate a metaphor. Perhaps that's being done in other stages of, applying it, right, or analyzing to create their own to match a certain context. But in this case, the last stage is curation. If you're thinking about bigger aspects of your course, can they actually curate an allegory, if that's the term, right? So rather than metaphor, allegory, can they write their own allegory, short story, right? In that case, they're showing not only do they understand what it is, but they can actually create it themselves because they understand it so well. So that's the revised taxonomy, but how can you use it in your own courses now, knowing what it is, if you didn't before, or maybe you did know, but you haven't really thought about applying it to your courses? I would say figuring out how many of the stages do you need in your course, because it might not be all of them. So for example, if you're teaching a prerequisite, so it's the first course in a set of courses, maybe you only need the first 2. Can they remember information and can they understand it, right? At this point, it's just grasping definitions, it's grasping concepts, it's remembering certain terminology. That just might be the focus of your course. I'm not trying to get them to create things. I'm not trying to get them to evaluate things. They need to know this stuff. They have to have this knowledge before they get to the next course in the series. And so your focus might be just remember and understand. And something to consider is that in the original version, the knowledge element, there is different types of knowledge, right? So for example, you might have, do they have the conceptual knowledge that they need? Do they have the procedural knowledge that they need? Do they have the metacognitive knowledge that they need, right? And so in that case, it might be that your course focuses on the remember and the understand, but you can also think back to the older version of the taxonomy too. What types of knowledge do they need to remember and understand? And that can be the focus of your course. Now on the other side, maybe you were the last course at the end of a series. And so in that case, you might be focusing just on evaluating and creating. So can you evaluate the application of these concepts that you've been learning throughout the series of courses? Can you create your own lesson plans, or can you create your own academic articles based off of everything you've learned so far? So you likely won't have all 6 of the taxonomy in one course, but perhaps you might in small doses. So you might have, let's say, a general education course. In my case, let's say I'm teaching literature. And so I might have, okay, remember these literary terms, understand these literary terms, apply them in this short story and in this novel, analyze how they're used in these texts, then evaluate if they're being used well or not well, and then now curate your own short story or your own graphic novel, or whatever the case may be, and use these terms that we've been discussing in it. So it's definitely possible to include all 6 in one course, but you want to know what is the goal of your course, and knowing that, do you need all 6 or just a certain number of them from the taxonomy? And so why use the taxonomy in this way when creating your courses? I think it's because it's really good use of action verbs. So I think there's a lot of times where we are creating activities and it's like, identify this, identify that, define this, define that, give an example of this, give an example of that. Whereas if you use a new version, there's a lot of verbs that are usually listed alongside the taxonomy. And so you can have, okay, well, yes, identify, recall, right? Those kind of verbs. But then you could have, okay, can you interpret this, right? Can you evaluate that? Can you compare these things, right? Can you create that thing? Can you build this? And so it gives you more of a sense of how to diversify what you're asking your students to do, right? It's not just remember these terms, right? It's can you recall these terms, but also can you identify these terms, right? And so on. So I do think it's helpful just as a really long list of verbs to put in your instructions for a course. And again, it connects to why you use it. It's helpful because you can, hopefully guarantee that your students are achieving your learning outcomes because you have a grasp of what actions students should be able to achieve by the end of your semester. And that goes back to, okay, well, which stages of the taxonomy is the focus of this course? Knowing that, okay, now I can figure out which activities to give them based off that answer. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have any questions, go ahead and let me know in the comments. If you like the video, press like so I know, and subscribe if you want more content about teaching tips and advice and edtech tutorials as well. This is just one video of my series of instructional design videos. So if you want to see the rest of those, I'll link them below as well.